Welcome to the NYREJ Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan, and today's guest is Scott Shnay. I hope I said that your last name right.
Yeah, got it.
Okay.
Got it. Yeah.
And Scott is with SK Development. And Scott, tell us a little bit about yourself as well as SK Development.
Sure. So I am fortunate enough to be a third generation New York City developer. My father started working with my grandfather back in the late 60s as home builders, predominantly in Queens and Staten Island. Then in the 80s, they became one of the larger Section 8 affordable housing developers, actually in Brooklyn. Carried that through the 80s, and then in the late 90s, my dad shifted and started doing more market rate development in and around Manhattan. And I went to join him in 2006. We sort of formed SK Development as a bit of an offshoot from the rest of the family business. And we've been at it now for almost 18 years. Had a little bit of a hiatus early on in 08 and 09, but since 2010, we've developed about 2.5 million square feet of all different asset classes, condo, rental, office, and hotel. Haven't really done much in the industrial or retail space as of yet. And, continue to be pretty active and have a number of projects under development now and a handful in the pipeline.
So I read that your grandfather was in the like a home builder.
Yeah.
So because I have a lot of friends that their grandparents were home builders, and then their father became a home builder, and it's they always talk about how they could be making so much money at one point, and then all of a sudden, how real estate works. There's a downturn, and then it's not making any money,
look, it's cyclical, right? So, a lot of real estate is being smart and good and efficient and good at what you do. And a lot of it is luck and just catching cycles at the right time. And, nobody's caught every cycle exactly right. And if anyone never tells you they have, they're probably not being terribly truthful. But, they started in the late 60s. My dad went to work with my grandfather right out of college. He was tarring foundations. There was no OSHA regulations back then. So he tells a story how his first day on the job, my grandfather put him in a 3-foot hole and said, "Here's a bucket of tar and, waterproof the foundation." And he came home after the first day, and my grandmother almost killed my grandfather because my dad was covered in tar. But, that's how they started. And, everyone had their ups and downs and went through the ups and downs of the 80s and the ups and downs of the 90s and the ups and downs of 2000s. And, fortunately, we've been on a decent run now the past, really since 2010, 2011, a couple of hiccups, obviously, during the pandemic. We had a couple of projects that we had to fight through and get through during the pandemic. And, those are for the most part behind us now. And we've just started a new slate of projects, over the past 6 months that are in construction. And, it's just kind of riding these waves up and down.
Yeah, well, finding third, fourth generation of the industry have figured out the whole plan of how the business works. They know how to ride out all the low times and the high times, so it all balances out. And as a matter of fact, those kind of companies usually tend to have grown like 5 times bigger than what a regular small time construction company has.
Yeah. I mean, we are fortunate enough that we still own a pretty big portfolio of our Section 8 projects. And those have, because of the way those are structured with the government subsidies, they've been able to weather every storm, basically. Say something's sort of recession proof, but they're pretty Teflon. And those have given us the ability to sort of, expand and contract and the rest of the development stuff sort of as needed, depending on what's going on, both in the market, in the economy, and just sort of go what's going on in our own business, right? Depending on how many projects we have going at one time. And, depending on, we generally don't keep a very large overhead and large sort of internal staff. We've always sort of prided ourselves on relying on professionals that are third parties and bringing them in sort of as needed basis and not pretending that we're the best at, every single aspect. So we've been able to keep a pretty lean shop. And, like I said, continue, I don't want to say leverage, but, obviously just know that we always have this pretty substantial affordable housing portfolio, as a little bit of the backbone.
So, you was talk about Section 8 housing. Back when they probably your family started to build them, it was probably a little easier. The land was probably more available, and you could do things
Yeah.
like that. Right
Yeah.
now, to build a Section 8 housing project, with the way the cost of the land as well as labor
Yeah.
and all the other things,
Yeah.
could you do it?
It's not, well, the program itself doesn't sort of formally exist anymore. Um, it's interesting. There has been a shift over really since the pandemic, and because of the way interest rates are, that a lot of developers, including ourselves, are starting to look at sort of fully affordable development projects again. In New York, they're very, very hard, because of what you said, just this cost of land, cost of construction, getting the necessary tax credits is a very competitive process. We're actually in pre-development, pretty deep into pre-development on a fully affordable project, actually in New Jersey, in Newark. And the state of New Jersey has been a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more cooperative in terms of getting tax credits and subsidies out to create affordable housing. I don't know if New York's going to follow through and, or follow behind, but it is definitely more difficult in New York City and New York State than right now in Jersey and some of the other surrounding states. So it's not impossible. When my dad and my grandfather developed our projects back in the early 80s, a lot of those were deals with the city where you were actually buying land from the city. And you had an agreement with the city to develop, old infill sites in a certain manner. But to do it now in sort of a fully private, affordable housing project in New York is hard. You're starting to see a little bit more of sort of public-private partnerships where developers are coming in and, whether they're rehabbing existing affordable housing or, leasing or acquiring sites or partnering with the city or the state on sites. It's, starting to see that a little bit. NYREJ obviously has a fair amount of land, whether it's parking lots or whatnot, that they're, starting to figure out that they need to do something with, one, just because it'll help create housing, and two, because they need the revenue. So, it's not easy, but it is a sort of an attractive business plan right now with interest rates where they are.
Well, you also said you work on office projects, office buildings. That's
Yeah.
probably changed quite a bit, especially after this pandemic. So,
Yeah.
are you still focusing on office or retrofitting the projects?
No, I mean, really. So we are now in the midst of our third boutique new development office project that we've done sort of as a company. The first one we did a while back was over in the meatpacking district. It was one of the first sort of boutique office buildings in the meatpacking district. And that was a successful project. That was about almost 14, 15 years ago. And then in 2018, we finished a smaller boutique office building in NoHo on Lafayette and Great Jones. And that was, very successful as well, leased up very well. And now we're doing our largest, I'll call it a boutique office building, which is about a 20-story, 120,000 square foot boutique office building, also in NoHo on Bowery and East 4th Street. And what we're seeing and sort of what the market is starting to tell people is that these sort of Class A boutique buildings are still in very high demand, actually. Office tenants that had, large floor plates in Midtown in the Plaza District are starting to say, you know what, I don't need this, big, massive office. I can do a much smaller office. Maybe it's a little bit closer to where the principal lives, in a new building with new systems and new glazing and new air filtration. And, we're actually providing a fairly substantial amenity package in terms of gyms and boardrooms and lounges and outdoor space. So, there is a little bit of, and again, we sort of hate the term of flight to quality, but a lot of these sort of high-end family offices, hedge funds, venture capital funds, private equity funds are starting to look at some of these more boutique, Class A new buildings, and are, the market for those is strong and the demand is strong. We just started leasing this last one in the last few weeks, and we've seen a lot of demand.
That's interesting to hear that, because I talk to a lot of developers and a lot of property owners that own office building, and they're scrambling, trying to figure out what do we do with all this space, because none of the companies that are renting or leasing properties, office properties, having a full staff come back. They've got
Right.
maybe partial, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
3 days in, 3 days out, or 2 days out, whatever. They have a hybrid type of system going. So
Yeah.
that's a great concept, the boutique type of office building.
And it's exactly for that, right? That old big financial services company that needed 15 or 20,000 square feet in Midtown that had, the space packed with employees, maybe really needs half of that space now, or maybe even less in a building like ours because they can use our communal boardrooms for the larger meetings, right? And to your point, they sort of do what they call like hotel desking, where, two or three employees will share the same desk because some are coming in on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and some are coming in on Tuesday, Thursdays. So that's what we're starting to see. Unfortunately, some of the older vintage office buildings, in Midtown and on the West Side, these buildings that were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, unfortunately, they're just kind of dinosaurs. I don't think that there's going to be a long lifespan for them. They're going to have to either be repurposed or knocked down and rebuilt or something, just because, to your point, people just don't office that way anymore and don't need those types of giant floor plates with no windows, with, 200 people sitting on a giant, like trading floor or whatever you want to call it, right? So it's definitely going to be, there's going to continue to be a shift in both how people build new office buildings and trying to figure out what they do with the older ones.
Now, I have heard some developers uh, purchasing these office buildings that are pretty much empty, and they're
Right.
converting them to multifamily properties.
Mm-hmm.
I have to imagine that's got to be a very expensive proposition.
It's very expensive, and to be honest, it's very difficult. We looked at a couple of them, right? When people built these office buildings way back when, they were never conceptualized as them being converted to residential. And there's most of them have some sort of issues, whether the core is in the wrong location, the floor plates are too big, so there's not proper light and air for residential. It's not easy. There's a couple of the larger developers that are starting to sort of get into that space. Obviously there was Silverstein and Metro Homes, Metro Lofts that have done a lot of it down in the financial district. And it works a little bit better there because the buildings are a little bit taller and the floor plates are smaller. You know, there's definitely going to be people that look at it, but it's not going to be the sort of windfall that everybody thinks. Just because a lot of these office buildings, just no matter what you do, won't work as a residential building. They just don't, function that way.
Well, because of the lack of housing, especially in the cities, and um, I, I've heard that they are able to get a lot of additional funding to do projects like that. I don't know if that's available everywhere, but
No, I mean, it's not here yet. The mayor is definitely putting a foot forward and trying to get certain subsidies and relax some of the zoning requirements so that it works. Um, I'd be interested to see actually what happens between now and the end of the year, because, it's definitely at the sort of tip of everybody's tongue. So if it's going to happen, I think it's going to happen soon, that they start to push through some rezonings. Like I said, relax some of the zoning requirements, and any sort of tax abatement or tax credit would have to come from the state. And unfortunately, right now the state government's a little dysfunctional. They all say that we need more housing, but they think that developers should be building it for free. And there's a little bit of an impasse right now in terms of how you take these buildings and provide the financial incentives necessary to convert them into residential housing.
and you think they're dysfunctional right now? I can go back centuries.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'm sure. But they're it's sort of shifting topic, but they are to a certain extent shooting themselves in the foot, right? They would haven't extended the 421A. They don't want to provide tax incentives for converting office buildings. Like, there has to be some sort of economics that makes sense when you're gonna, put your balance sheet and your reputation on the line to build housing or convert housing. And it's right now the numbers just don't make sense, right? With interest rates and construction costs where they are, if they're not going to provide some sort of subsidies or tax abatements, building a rental building or converting an office building to a rental building just doesn't make any financial sense. Um, it'll be interesting to see what happens if they do try and do it through like an affordable program where they say, okay, we're going to just provide, tax credits, but you have to make the buildings 50 or even 100% affordable.
Right.
That would start to create some energy behind it. But to your point, the state government doesn't always. And look, I think obviously New York is and the rest of the state are not always aligned because New York City is New York City and needs certain things, and costs here are higher and land is higher, and it just there's a little bit of a breakdown.
There's you you say New York City. There's a whole different way of doing business when you're in New York City, as well as if you went to upstate New York. Things are a lot different.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, you went to New Jersey because there's some things that you could do there that you couldn't do in New York City.
Yep.
Long Island is also another story. You can do things there that you couldn't. Are you finding a particular area that you're focusing on more so than just in New York? I know you said New Jersey.
Yeah, we have two projects right now in Newark, New Jersey. And we're finding that Newark is very, very pro-development, very pro-business. They're very cooperative and collaborative and trying to get new projects, approved and sort of in the ground. So, we're starting to look, in some areas in northern and central Jersey. We've looked at a couple of projects up in Westchester. Again, it's, Westchester is not that much different than New York City, except just that construction is a lot easier there because you don't have buildings, right on top of you. So we looked at some stuff up in Portchester and some other towns up there. Haven't pulled the trigger on anything yet. We have not really looked out on the island. Surprisingly, just not. We haven't really gone east. Strangely enough, our family's office is in Great Neck, but we haven't really done a lot of development out there, if any. Really, we did a lot of Queens, obviously, and sort of like Little Neck back in the day, and but we haven't really moved east. So, I think we're going to start to focus a little bit more on central and northern Jersey. There definitely seems to be a little bit more incentive to get buildings built and housing built, and again, they're just a little bit more developer friendly. I mean, again, if you think about New York City right now, you need special permits to build hotels. You can't really build rental housing without a 421A program. To our earlier conversation, building office buildings is very, is interesting, but has to be sort of right on. Right now, the only thing that really makes a lot of sense to build in New York is condominiums. And, if you're able to get an affordable housing project financed, building affordable housing. But other than that, there's not a lot else that you even can build. So, I think there's going to just be not just me, but I think you're going to see a lot of developers. I mean, look, a lot of them went to Miami already, right? Or to Austin or to Nashville or wherever. And you're going to see some guys, again, moving up into Western, moving out into Jersey, just because, you can keep your infrastructure and still work from New York, and not have to sort of open secondary offices or satellite offices. And those areas are just more developer friendly.
So is that the game plan for you, or you think that
we're not afraid of condominiums, and we're not afraid of condo development in New York City. We never have been. We believe in New York. It's difficult, for sure, but we're here and our feet are firmly planted here. And we have 3 projects in construction right now in New York City. We have 2 more sites that we own that we're about to start, 3 more sites, sorry, that we own, and we'll probably be starting construction next year. One actually in the fourth quarter of this year, and probably 2 more that will start next year. One of those is a rental project that's sort of grandfathered under the old tax abatement program, and 2 are condominium projects. So, while we're looking sort of in other areas, we still have a decent pipeline of projects here that we, want to execute on, and think that, because of people's focusing outside of New York, if you can stay in New York and develop, you're going to get rewarded for it, because there's going to be a lack of inventory and, not a lack of demand, right? New York is still New York. So, there'll be slowdowns, there'll be ups and downs, but, the market for sale housing is going to always be strong. And then sort of the other part of that is, even with interest rates at 6.5% or 7% to buy a condominium, with rents at $110 or $120 a foot for renting an apartment, it still is almost cheaper to buy an apartment than rent in New York City. If you have the down payment and you can get the mortgage, the dollars and cents of it are that, buying is almost cheaper than renting right now, even with high interest rates, because the rents are just, astronomical.
So are you taking a older building and converting
No,
it, or you're
no,
building it from ground up?
we basically always do new construction. We've done very, very little conversion. One of the projects we're doing right now is a conversion of a pretty interesting project. We won an RFP to convert a historic or renovate and restore an historic bathhouse on the beach in Rockaway, New York, in Queens. So that's really the only conversion of restoration project that we've ever done. And then actually the affordable housing project in Newark is the conversion of actually a landmarked, also historic office building that we're going to repurpose. And strangely enough, is an office building that does lay out well for apartments. So we're going to repurpose that building and convert that to fully affordable housing. At least that's the business plan at the moment. But we have one new condominium project we're building in Soho right now, the new office building. We've started, pre-development or pre-construction stuff on a new rental building in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. And then we have two condominium projects sort of in the pipeline, one in Midtown Manhattan and one also in Brooklyn.
Well, it sounds like you have enough going on to go through the next maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the next 3 to 4 for sure. We generally like to have 3, 4, 5 projects kind of in construction at once, with maybe 2 or 3 in sort of, pre-development or pipeline. And then sort of as ones roll off, sort of start to pick up another one. So, with 3.5 projects in construction right now, we'd like to have 1 or 2 sort of more in active construction. And then we'll start to look at the next pipeline. But yes, we've got a pretty full dance card for the next, 3, 4, maybe 5 years.
So you have a combination of, you have clients that you do the work for, and you have your own projects that you do for your own company. So it's kind of a mix there.
Yeah, majority are ones that we develop as the developers for ourselves. Really, as a result of the pandemic and just sort of for, people reaching out, we're doing 2 projects that I'll sort of call as more like a fee developer, maybe 3, where we're incentivized to obviously develop the project, but we're more a little bit more of a hired gun for somebody that has a piece of real estate that they want to get developed, or maybe it was a little bit of a distress situation and they need someone to come in and sort of help push it along a little bit. So we generally have not done that really until really since the pandemic, since 2021, we've done a couple of those now. There's nothing wrong with them. It's a very nice business and a nice business plan, and allows you to sort of really push a project along and work with, a team to get something developed. So right now, 2 of sort of the 6 projects that we kind of have going are sort of fee projects, and the other 4 are ones that we're, the active sponsor, developer, owner of.
So do you have plans to grow outside of the New York, New Jersey, or even New England area?
We've looked at a little bit of stuff in Miami and a little bit in Palm Beach.
Well, that's for winter projects, right?
For when exactly,
Yeah.
for my November to February projects. But there are a couple down there, but those markets have gotten a little saturated, and it's sort of the same thing. Land prices there have gotten high, and construction costs there have gotten high, and so it's always a little risky to jump into a new market unless you really feel supremely confident about something. I think we would like to look at get 1 or 2 projects going in South Florida. We've looked in other areas of the country, but really haven't focused very hard. We actually looked at some stuff in Las Vegas back in the day. We looked at one project in Dallas, but that was, more sort of a cursory review of it. So I think if we're going to expand, it's probably going to be into South Florida. But we're not sort of rushing. If something happens to come across, our desk that makes sense, we can execute on, then we'll do it. But to your point, we've got a pretty good pipeline and runway of projects here that we're focused on.
Well, it sounds like you got your whole act together. You got what, 3?
I fooled you.
Well, you got 3 generations, so one
Yeah.
generation will get it right.
Yeah, exactly. At some point we'll figure it out. But no,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very lucky that my dad's still active and we work together every day. And um, it's nice to have somebody there to point me in the right direction when you're off track. And um, it's been great. I mean, I was even fortunate enough to work with my grandfather a little bit, sort of towards the end of his career. I was his chauffeur for a few years. Going out, he was always the one that went out to the affordable projects to deal with the stuff in the field, and my dad was a little bit more sort of dealing with the day to day, sort of in the office. So it's been, yeah, I'm very fortunate. I've
Well,
got
that
three
is
kids.
a fortunate to be able to do that, and because a lot of people don't always get along well with their father or even their grandfather.
It's not always easy. And um, I think because my dad was able to learn from his grandfather and sort of learn how that relationship worked and didn't work, it made it a little bit easier for me and my dad. Really for the first few years, I basically just sat and said nothing. I would sit in project meetings and go to the site with him, and I was mute. And then over time, he started giving me more and more leash to sort of take on more and more parts of the development, and there definitely hasn't been sort of a change of roles. I mean, he's still the boss, but we've created a nice partnership, and it's really more, I think, at this point, more of a partnership than sort of like I don't really work for my dad anymore. We're partners in our business.
Well,
And
you
I think,
learned so much of the business over the
yeah,
years from both your grandfather and your father, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Um, it's like I said, I've been very fortunate.
now
We'll
you
see.
can
I got three kids, so we'll see
they'll fall.
yeah, they're little, so I got some time, but um,
Uh,
it was
there's
interesting.
always going to be, because it it's a great industry because you always get that sense of accomplishment every time something is completed.
Yeah.
You know, so
Mm-hmm.
I because my son is a developer also,
Oh,
and so when that happens, you have that. It's like I don't know. It's a great feeling.
it is. I mean, when you have a building that now you finished and is going to stand there for hopefully 100 years, there's something that's the recognition of your 3, 4, 5 years of work. Um, as opposed to other industries where if you're you're not necessarily creating, maybe you're creating wealth, but you're not creating something that, is that tangible.
Right.
So, yes, when you see a building and, even now buildings that we built in 2010, 11, 12, 10, 12 years later, you still walk by and you're like, oh, looks good. It's standing up to the test of time. And, there's other people that live there that are happy. And, yeah, it definitely gives you a sense of accomplishment when you sort of walk by something that you've
Yeah, and
put a
it's
lot
something that will be there for generations to see.
of. Mm-hmm.
So your kids will be able to see it. Their kids will be able to see it. I know my grandfather was a bricklayer in the
Mm-hmm.
city of Boston, and he worked on, when they built those brick buildings, it was like 7, 10 story buildings. There was
Sure.
all done by hand. They didn't have elevators and things like that when they were starting the construction.
There were.
But
Yeah.
some of those buildings from the 30s and 40s that he was working on are still there. You know,
Yep. I'm sure.
so
Um,
so generations will see the work that you have completed.
yeah. I hope so.
Oh,
Hopefully they're
yeah.
still around.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, Scott. It
Thank you for
was
having me.
interesting. I'm glad to see you're following in the footsteps and everything is going in the direction that you want it to go.
Yeah.
And it's sounds like you're becoming a success. And
All right. Yeah. Trying every day's a new day, but yeah, we've been very fortunate, and hopefully, you know, work our way through up markets that are up and down, and high interest rates and low interest rates and high construction costs, and keep going. So, but yeah, thank you very much for having me, and we really enjoyed this conversation.
so if someone is interested in dealing with SK development for a project or just I don't know what else would they want out of you,
Sure.
but how would they get a hold of you?
Uh, Probably best is just to go on the website and send something through the website. There's a contact information there.
Okay, and it's skdevelopment.com.
Yep, skdevelopment.com. Exactly.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. We were talking with Scott Shnay, and
Shnay,
he's with
got it. Yeah.
and he's with SK Development. And I appreciate it again. I thank you for coming on the show. And I'm Rick Kaplan with the New England and New York Real Estate Journal. And until next time, have a great day.